My wife turned to me and said she was going to meet a man for a romantic dinner. I just nodded, paralyzed. The sound of her voice still echoed when she left, as if nothing had happened, as if it were a simple appointment in the middle of the routine. But my heart didn't accept it. Something inside me screamed. It couldn't be real. That woman who had slept next to me for years, who shared Sundays with me in comfortable silence, who laughed with my daughter at the jokes I pretended not to repeat, couldn't be about to betray me so explicitly, so shamelessly. I followed her. Without a plan, without certainty, only with a dull pain growing in my chest, throbbing as if the betrayal had already been accomplished. And there, in the distance, sitting in a rented car, I saw the exact moment when she leaned over the restaurant table and kissed the man. A kiss that left no doubt. A kiss that said everything she hadn't had the courage to say to me. It was affection, desire, intimacy, everything that a sincere kiss carries when there is feeling involved. She had given herself body and soul, and for the first time I asked myself, at what point in our lives did she allow herself to love another? I stood still. My hands clenched on the steering wheel, my jaw clenched, my eyes burning. I felt the blood drain from my face. I tried to breathe. But the air seemed to have disappeared. I could no longer feel the ground. I stood there, staring at the scene as if watching an accident in slow motion, knowing the collision was about to happen but unable to stop it. She laughed. She laughed like she hadn't laughed in years with me. The kind of free-flowing laugh she always said she'd forgotten what it felt like. And then I realized that she hadn't just betrayed me, she'd rediscovered herself in another man. What was left of me? A weight on my chest. A hole where there had once been pride, security, love. But I didn't cry. Not yet. Crying was acceptance, and I wasn't ready to accept it. I drove home with my knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel, my face pale, my eyes dry. And there, in the silence of the room, I made a plan. Not a plan for immediate revenge. But something more subtle. Something with the bittersweet taste of justice. I arranged a divorce. Cold. Calculated. Surgical. A divorce that would tear apart not only the legal ties, but also the perfect facade she maintained in front of everyone, her family, her friends, even our daughter. Yes, especially our daughter. Because she didn't know. None of them knew. For weeks, I pretended to be normal. Family lunches. Empty smiles. I would straighten my tie, take out the trash, ask her about her day. A meticulous theater while, behind the scenes, I prepared every detail of what was to come. And when the day came, when everything was ready, I took the file in the black leather folder that she herself had given me as a gift years ago. That folder that had accompanied me through the greatest achievements of my career. And there, face to face with her family gathered for a birthday dinner, I placed the folder on the table with a smile. "Open it," I said. She hesitated. Everyone looked. And then she opened it. And found there not just papers, she found the exact reflection of what she had caused. Silence spread through the room like a virus. The laughter stopped. The cutlery stopped in the air. And she, pale, choked on the words. "What is this?" she whispered, already knowing the answer. And I, firmly, looked into her eyes for the last time as her husband. "This is the end of the lie you've been living. This is the truth, finally, knocking on your door." She broke down. She cried. She apologized. She tried to say that it had been a mistake. A slip-up. That I was still the love of her life. But I didn't listen to her. Because at that moment, I was no longer the man she knew. I was someone else. Someone who had died and been reborn at the exact moment I saw her kiss another man. She tried to come back. She tried to seduce me with sweet words and old memories. She tried to rebuild in weeks what she had destroyed in minutes. But I denied her. Not out of hate, but out of respect for what I was. Because forgiving would be betraying myself. And, ironically, it was only then that she understood the value I had. Only then did she see the man she had lost. But time, that cruel master, does not give back what it took. And now she lives among the rubble of a life that she herself demolished. I, on the other hand, found peace, and who would have thought, even a new love. But that is part of the story that you are yet to hear. Because what happened to her afterwards, well, it wasn't just the divorce that brought her down. It was something much deeper. Something she never imagined. Something that came from where she least expected it, something that began in our daughter's silent gaze that very night. A look that carried judgment, pain, and something even more powerful. A look that would change everything. Forever. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support any kind of betrayal in any way. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they carry painful truths, because betrayal, in real life, destroys homes, erodes trust and leaves scars that time cannot erase. Get ready now to dive into an intense narrative, full of real emotions, surprising twists and an unforgettable lesson. Settle in. Take a deep breath. You are about to hear a story shocking. They met on a summer afternoon, when the heat turned the sidewalks golden and people slowed down to enjoy the sunset. Daniel was leaving work, his jacket hanging over his arm, his mind tired after another tiring day as a manager at a regional bank, when his eyes met those of a woman sitting in front of a small bookstore. She was holding an open book, but seemed lost in thought. Her brown hair was loose over her shoulders, her skin was golden from the sun and her gaze was so deep that, for a moment, he forgot where he was going. Her name was Elisa. A literature teacher, passionate about tragic stories and artisanal coffees, she had a gentle smile and an almost shy laugh that escaped whenever she felt truly comfortable. He approached her with some excuse, something about the book she was reading, and the conversation, to their surprise, flowed as if they were old acquaintances. That afternoon, the world seemed to slow down for both of them, and even years later, Daniel would still remember the smell of coffee mixed with Elisa's light perfume, and the soft sound of her voice talking about Virginia Woolf. They dated for 2 years before deciding to move in together, and 6 months later, they got married in a small ceremony in the garden of her parents' house, surrounded by close friends and sincere smiles. The first years of their marriage were marked by complicity. They were the kind of couple that everyone said were made for each other. She had a sweet, affectionate manner, and he, although more serious, found the perfect balance in her. Together, they seemed to form a small fortress of tranquility and harmony. The love between them was not scandalous or exaggerated, it was silent, like a breeze that passes through time without being noticed, but without it, the air would seem heavier. When Elisa found out she was pregnant, Daniel cried. Not out of fear, but out of a feeling he couldn't name, a mixture of pride, responsibility, and gratitude. During the pregnancy, he became an even more devoted man. He painted the baby's room himself, installed shelves with children's books and made sure to attend every doctor's appointment, even when he had to leave work early. The couple's daughter, Laura, arrived one cold morning, and her arrival brought the two of them even closer together. Daniel would spend hours watching Elisa rock the little girl, singing soft songs she had learned from her mother. Elisa, in turn, admired the way he changed her diapers with precision and care, even when the night seemed endless. Their home, a one-story house with large windows and a well-kept garden, became the setting for a simple life, but full of small, meaningful moments. On weekends, Daniel would tend to the yard while Elisa read on the porch, and Laura would run with the dogs on the lawn. It was a scene worthy of a movie they didn't even know they were living. The years passed. Laura grew up, becoming a sweet, observant teenager, intelligent like her mother and calm like her father. Elisa continued teaching, now at a private school, while Daniel climbed another step in his career, being promoted to director of the bank branch where he had worked since he was 25. Life seemed to be in balance. But there was a detail, almost imperceptible, that began to slowly infiltrate between them. Time. Time, with its silent insistence, was creating small cracks. They weren't fights, nor direct disagreements. They were silences. Eyes that avoided each other at the end of the day. Hasty kisses. Unspoken words. Elisa began to spend more time on extracurricular projects, literary workshops and cultural events. Daniel, in turn, immersed himself more and more in work. His responsibilities grew and he found himself increasingly tied to spreadsheets, goals and decisions that kept him away from home for long hours. They both justified their absences as efforts for the good of the family. And it was true. But, at the same time, each step they took towards their own goals seemed to take them further away from the original path they had built together. Still, the affectionate gestures continued. Daniel bought Elisa her favorite wines whenever she returned from her trips. She prepared special dinners for important dates. Lara, sensitive as she was, noticed the change in the air, but said nothing. Maybe she thought it was normal. After all couples change over time. Sometimes, on Sunday nights, Daniel would go into his daughter's room, sit on the edge of her bed and listen to her talk about school, books, and her dreams. She spoke with a sparkle in her eyes, and he would smile, feeling that he had done something right in life. Elisa, on the other hand, continued to dedicate herself to literature as a way of keeping alive a part of herself that everyday life sometimes tried to erase. There was a lightness in her way of being in the world, but also a weariness that she did not share with anyone. They still went out to dinner every now and then. Sometimes they watched a movie together. They laughed about some memories. But it was as if life had become a script revisited so many times that the words no longer surprised. The affection was there, but lukewarm. Safe, predictable. Daniel thought that was the natural thing in marriage. Elisa, silently, wondered if that was all there was to live for. He didn't know, but many nights she stayed awake after he fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time she had felt that butterflies in her stomach. That feeling of being alive, of being desired, of having something new ahead of her. And maybe it wasn't a lack of love, but of novelty, of intensity, of space to be more than a wife and mother. She loved her home, her daughter, her husband. But she also loved herself, and sometimes she found herself disappearing behind the walls of routine. Daniel, on the other hand, was proud of the family they had built. Even when he was tired, he tried to keep everything in order. He was methodical, rational, but affectionate in his own way. He wasn't one for grand gestures, but his eyes said what words couldn't. Sometimes, at the end of the day, he would catch himself looking at Elisa while she was making tea or organizing the books on the shelf and he would feel a tightness in his chest. As if something precious was slipping through his fingers and he didn't know how to hold it. But he didn't say anything. Because he thought she knew. He thought she understood his love in the small things he did. And maybe that was what was missing, to say it. To say it more. To listen more. They got used to loving each other in silence, and the silence, over time, turned into distance. The routine followed. With family dinners, birthdays celebrated, trips planned for the holidays. Lara entered university and began to return home less frequently. But when she did come, it was as if time stood still. She brought joy, movement, warmth. For Daniel, she was the center of his existence. His pride, his strength. Elisa also felt this strong bond, but between mother and daughter there was something more intimate, closer. A silent trust that they cultivated since Lara's first steps. Amidst this apparently stable routine, where everything seemed to follow in superficial harmony, small details went unnoticed. Forced smiles, long phone calls, distant glances. But no one questioned it. Each one had their commitments, their excused absences, their lives fitted into a functional routine. Until one night, something changed. A seemingly simple decision set off a silent chain of events that would eventually shatter the facade of perfection that had been so carefully constructed. But at that moment, nothing seemed different. Daniel came home with 2 crystal glasses that he had bought at a fancy store downtown, thinking of surprising Elisa with a romantic dinner over the weekend. At the same time, she was choosing a discreet dress for a literary event where she had been invited to speak about a tragic romance. Neither of them imagined that that weekend would change everything. But fate, with its precise cruelty, had already begun to sew the invisible threads that would soon become unbreakable. The house was silent that night. The clock was just after 10 when Daniel, sitting on the porch, looked up at the clear sky and took a deep breath. He thought about how quickly everything had passed. How that love, which began on a late afternoon with the smell of coffee and paper, now seemed like a book with the pages glued together. And even without knowing what was coming, she felt a slight discomfort in her chest. As if something was about to be ripped out of him. But I didn't know what. Not yet. The morning after that peaceful and seemingly ordinary night, Daniel woke up earlier than usual, driven by an inexplicable desire to surprise Elisa. He made coffee, toast with jam, and fresh juice. He left everything on the kitchen table, along with a handwritten note. Today I thought about us. I just wanted to remind you of how it all started. I'll wait for you for dinner later, just the two of us. When Elisa entered the kitchen, still sleepy, she stopped in front of the note, her eyes fixed on the words. She smiled slightly, but there was something in her expression that Daniel didn't notice when he kissed her goodbye. Something that looked more like guilt than affection. He left in a hurry, as always, without noticing that her smile was too restrained for someone who had just been reminded of a love that, at least in appearance, still remained. The days that followed were strangely silent. Elisa seemed more distracted, absent, lost in thoughts that were too long. When questioned, she said she was just tired, that the routine at school had intensified due to a new group reading project, which required extra time and meetings outside of normal business hours. Daniel believed her. Not out of naivety, but out of habit. Because loving, after so long, also meant trusting in something that you didn't understand. And so, her absences began to become common. Some nights she didn't have dinner at home. Other times she would come home late, with plausible but cold excuses. She started to leave her cell phone on silent, something she never did before. She exchanged messages frequently, discreetly turning the device when she realized he was nearby. The small gestures accumulated like crumbs of a secret that was slowly being revealed, but Daniel still fought against the discomfort that was beginning to form inside him. Lara had returned to spend a few days at home due to an extended vacation at university. Her daughter's presence seemed to light up the house, bringing a joy that had long since dissipated within the walls. Daniel took the opportunity to dedicate himself more, trying to rekindle bonds, trying to feel the lightness of times gone by again. The three of them had dinner together, laughed about old stories, and talked about plans for the future. But even in this scenario of apparent harmony, there were cracks. Elisa, although smiling, kept her eyes always wandering elsewhere. Her cell phone rang frequently, and sometimes she walked away to answer calls that she said were from school. Lara, attentive as always, noticed, but said nothing. She just watched. That Friday, Daniel came home with 2 tickets to a theater show. He knew that Elisa loved that kind of program and decided to surprise her. He walked in excitedly, calling her name. He found Lara alone in the living room, reading. She said that her mother had gone out to dinner with a coworker, a new teacher who was going through a complicated divorce. Daniel frowned for a moment, then smiled and nodded. He handed the tickets to his daughter and asked her to save them for another day. But something, at that moment, was different. It was then that he felt, for the first time, a stronger impulse. An uncomfortable, visceral sensation that began to run through his body. There was something wrong, something that needed to be confirmed, or perhaps denied. And that was what led him to leave the house without saying anything, get in the car and drive aimlessly, just following his intuition. He parked near the restaurant where Elisa said she would be. He stayed in the car, watching the commotion, trying not to imagine the worst. He just wanted to confirm, see his coworker, maybe say hello to them. But when she appeared at the door, accompanied, something inside him broke. She was with another man. They walked side by side, smiling. There were no books in their hands, no worried expressions. It was too light for a conversation about divorce. And then it happened. Elisa stopped, turned to the man and kissed him. It wasn't a quick or shy kiss, it was a kiss full of intimacy, the kind of gesture you share with someone you love, or someone you really want. Daniel stood still, watching as if it were an illusion created by a tired mind. But it wasn't. His heart was beating fast, his eyes were burning. He didn't get out of the car. He didn't make a fuss. He just stood there, motionless, trying to assimilate that the woman he had shared years of his life with whom he had a daughter, with whom he had dreamed of growing old, was now with someone else. And the worst part, she had lied to him with frightening ease. That night he didn't sleep. He waited for Elisa to come back. He pretended to be tired, went to bed early. He heard her footsteps around the house, heard the sound of the shower, smelled the perfume she wore whenever she wanted to feel pretty. When she came into the room, she smiled and said that dinner had been tiring. She lay down next to him as if nothing had happened. And that was what hurt the most. The silence. The lie embedded in every trivial gesture. Daniel didn't answer. He just stayed there, with his eyes open in the dark, listening to her breathing, thinking about everything he could have said. But he didn't. Not yet. In the following days, he did not confront Elisa. He preferred to observe. He began to put together signs, small details, messages on her cell phone that she secretly typed, more careful clothes for meetings that she called school meetings. The routine, previously predictable, was now a puzzle of excuses, inconsistent schedules, nervous expressions. Lara noticed the change in her father. He was quieter, more reserved. The dark circles under his eyes grew, and even in his free time, he seemed distant, always thinking about something. One day, she approached him and asked if everything was okay. Daniel smiled, said he was just tired, but she did not believe him. She became restless, and also began to observe her mother more closely. The pieces, although loose, began to form an outline of something bigger. But neither of them, father or daughter, was prepared for what was to come. Elisa, in turn, was experiencing an internal conflict that was slowly eating away at her. The man she had met months ago was engaging, kind, made her feel desired, interesting. It wasn't just physical, it was a feeling of rebirth. She felt alive, free, as if she had rediscovered who she was before becoming a wife and mother. Every encounter with him seemed to lift a weight off her shoulders. She saw herself again, young, beautiful, admired. But when she returned home, the weight of guilt crushed her. She saw her husband and felt a pang of remorse. I looked at Lara and wanted to ask for forgiveness. But it continued. I kept going because I thought it was just for a while. That it would soon pass. That it was a phase. A distraction. It wasn't love, she told herself. It was just an escape valve. A space where I could breathe. The problem is that the more he tried to justify it, the more he got caught up in the lie. And the chasm between her and Daniel grew silently. The following Friday, Daniel arrived home early. He prepared a light dinner, organized the living room, and put on some soft music. He wanted to see how far she would go. Elisa arrived late, explaining that she had yet another parent-teacher meeting. She was wearing makeup, her hair was done, and she was wearing a new perfume. Daniel smiled and said nothing. He just watched her eat slowly, telling her the trivialities of her day. When she got up to go to her room, he followed her with his eyes. And then, discreetly, he picked up her cell phone, which she had left on the table. The password was still the same. It only took a few seconds for everything to come to light. The messages were there. Old conversations, photos, scheduled meetings, whispered declarations through texts and audios. Daniel's heart pounded. The ground seemed to spin. He put the cell phone back and walked to the backyard. He needed air. Distance. He needed to think. And it was there, on that silent night, under the clear, indifferent sky, that he decided what he would do. He would not react violently. He would not allow himself to be the sterile victim. He would come up with a plan. A meticulous plan. Painful. Definitive. But before that, he needed to confirm everything with his own eyes. He needed to see, record, absorb. And so, throughout the week, he began to follow her discreetly. He would arrive home from work early, say he had meetings, and leave. He followed her steps with a coldness he himself did not know he possessed. And finally, on a Thursday afternoon, he saw her enter the same restaurant again, next to the same man. They were laughing. They were holding hands on the table. She was beautiful. Light. Different. Daniel did not cry. He did not feel immediate anger. He felt emptiness. A kind of numbness that left him too lucid to collapse. And then, when he saw the kiss happen, he did not move. He simply let that image mark him. Because there, at that exact moment, something inside him ceased to exist. And something else, even greater, was born in its place. But what Daniel didn't know was that at that very dinner, something would be said that would completely change the course of everything. Something he would only discover at the most unpredictable moment. Something Elisa never imagined could be discovered. And that would make the pain of betrayal seem like just the first step in a much deeper fall. That morning, Daniel woke up with a strange serenity. It wasn't peace. It was something colder, more calculated. A type of lucidity that can only be achieved when there are no more doubts or hopes. He had spent the night awake in the home office, reading and rereading the messages exchanged between Elisa and the man with whom she had shared moments that should never have happened. Every word, every photo, every audio, everything was there like a perfectly assembled puzzle. But there was something that didn't fit, something that caught his attention in a subtle but constant way. In one of the most recent messages, Elisa told her lover that they needed to be more careful, because Laura was starting to get suspicious. The name of his daughter among those conversations hit him like a punch. Daniel knew that Laura was observant, but something in that sentence sounded strange. Elisa wasn't saying that Laura was suspicious of her, but of something bigger. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that his daughter's silences in the last few days carried a different weight. At breakfast, Elisa tried to keep up her appearance. She served tea, cut slices of bread, and talked about a poetry event that would take place that evening. Daniel just listened, with a half smile and eyes that no longer saw the same way. Laura came in next, her hair still wet, her headphones hanging around her neck, with that look that seemed to pass through walls. She sat down and greeted her parents, but her eyes lingered on Daniel for a second longer. He noticed. This wasn't just tiredness. It was tension. He decided that it was no longer possible to put it off. The truth needed to come out, all of it. And, more than that, it needed to be exposed in the most direct way possible. He wanted justice. And he wanted everyone to know exactly what had happened. He waited until the end of the day. He asked Elisa to invite her parents to dinner at his house. He said he wanted to announce something important, related to a professional decision. Elisa seemed surprised, but accepted. She thought he might be changing jobs or planning to retire early. She called her parents, who confirmed their attendance. Daniel also invited Laura to stay for dinner, saying he wanted everyone together for this conversation. The evening arrived with a light breeze coming in through the open windows. The table was set with care, like at a celebratory dinner. Candles, cloth napkins, crystal glasses. Elisa was wearing a discreet wine-colored dress and had her hair tied up in an elegant bun. She seemed nervous, but excited. Her parents arrived punctually, sat down with smiles, asked about Laura, about work, about school. It all seemed like a normal dinner. Until Daniel stood up and thanked everyone for coming. He said he really did have something important to say. He began by talking about family. About how the years shape relationships, how trust is built with gestures and not promises. Elisa watched in silence, her eyes fixed on his, perhaps already sensing that something was wrong. Daniel then said that he wanted to share something with everyone, something that would change the course of their lives. He opened a folder and took out a stack of documents. He said that it was everything they needed to see. That it was not a professional announcement, but a personal decision. He handed the folder to Elisa, who hesitated. When she finally opened it, her eyes quickly scanned the first few pages. She recognized the papers. It was the formal request for divorce, with all the clauses already defined, including the division of assets, custody of the daughter, and restrictions on access to the house. Her face lost color. She tried to speak, but her voice failed. Her mother leaned over to see the contents and put her hand to her mouth. Her father frowned, confused. Lara, on the other side of the table, remained motionless, just watching. Elisa stood up slowly, trying to argue that she could explain. That it wasn't necessary, that there was a way to resolve it between them. Daniel, in a low, firm voice, said that the only possible explanation would have to be public, because the betrayal had crossed over into the private world and contaminated what belonged to everyone. Elisa was crying now, babbling that it had all been a mistake, that she had lost herself, that she felt invisible, but that she still loved him. Daniel listened without blinking, until finally he turned to Lara and asked if she had anything to say. The silence that followed was dense, almost suffocating. All eyes turned to her. Lara stood up, walked to the center of the room, stopped next to her mother and then said, in a firm, almost cold voice, "She didn't just betray my father, she made me part of it." Elisa's parents were shocked. Elisa tried to interrupt, but Lara raised her hand to ask for silence. She said she had known about the betrayal for weeks. That she had found out by accident when she saw messages on her mother's cell phone, which was left unlocked on the kitchen counter. She said she had confronted Elisa that same day, begging her to end it, so that she wouldn't destroy the family. She said her mother swore that it would only be a passing experience, that she would stop. But she didn't. And worse, she asked her own daughter to lie to her father if he asked about the schedules, about the disappearances. Elisa tried to deny it, but Lara interrupted her with tears in her eyes, saying that she had proof, that she had screenshots, that she had saved everything because she knew she would need it one day. Daniel remained silent, his fists clenched, his eyes fixed on his daughter as if he saw in her confirmation of everything he feared most. Elisa fell onto the couch, her face covered in her hands, sobbing. His mother tried to understand what had happened, while his father remained silent, clearly embarrassed. The room was filled with a suffocating tension. And then, Lara said what no one expected to hear. She said her mother's betrayal not only hurt her as a daughter, but destroyed her as a person. That since she found out, she started having anxiety attacks, that she couldn't sleep anymore, that the complicit silence was eating away at her. He said he even thought about dropping out of college and disappearing. And he only didn't do it because his father deserved the truth. He deserved to know that he wasn't crazy, that his intuition was real, that his suffering was justified. Daniel slowly got up and walked towards his daughter. He hugged her like he had never done before. There, in that silent gesture, was something profound. A shared pain. A possible reconstruction. Elisa stood up unsteadily, asking for a chance to explain. She said she had felt alone, invisible, forgotten. That she needed something to remind her that she was alive, that she was a woman. But when he tried to justify his involvement with the other man, Daniel interrupted. He said her mistake was not just cheating, but involving his daughter. Force Lara to be an accomplice. Take away her innocence, her admiration, her trust. And that this was unforgivable. Elisa tried to get closer to her daughter, but Lara backed away. He said he couldn't look at her the same way anymore. That the woman she admired had disappeared. Elisa fell to her knees, begging for forgiveness. She said she was lost, that she felt trapped in a role she didn't choose, that she needed more. But none of that was enough. Nothing erased what had been done. Silence fell again, this time heavier than ever. And Daniel, with a firm voice, said that from that moment on, each one would go their own way. And that was just the beginning. Dinner is not over. The dishes remained untouched. The wine was left there, unopened. Elisa cried alone on the couch, while her parents left embarrassed, unable to say anything. Daniel and Lara went up together, in silence. In that moment, they knew that the pain they carried was no longer lonely. They knew that no matter how much the world had fallen apart, there was still something that united them. A bond that betrayal tried to destroy, but failed. And while Elisa remained there, alone, facing the void she helped to create, she still did not know that the greatest consequence of her actions was not the loss of her husband, nor the end of her marriage. But something much deeper. Something that would soon come to light. Something none of them expected. Something that would make everything that had happened so far seem like just a prelude to an even more devastating truth. The silence that reigned in the house in the following days was not just any emptiness, it was the kind of silence that carries the weight of everything that had been said and twice the weight of what could no longer be said. Elisa remained in the guest room, her things piled up in still open boxes, as if refusing to accept the permanence of a new reality. Daniel didn't kick her out, but he also hadn't said a word since dinner. I avoided looking at each other, I avoided shared spaces. If she went into the kitchen, he went out. If she sat in the living room, he went upstairs. Lara, in turn, spent her days away. I slept at a friend's house, returning only to change clothes or pick up books. Between her and her mother there was an abyss of silence, and none of Elisa's gestures could overcome it. She tried leaving notes, sending messages, preparing her daughter's favorite dishes, all to no avail. Lara read and tore up the papers, ignored the texts, left the dishes untouched in the sink until they rotted. And when Elisa tried to physically approach her, touching her arm as she hurried down the hallway, Lara simply said with cold eyes, "You lost me. I was your daughter, not your accomplice." Daniel started leaving earlier and later each day. His colleagues at the bank noticed the change in his expression, the rigidity that had replaced his old good humor. One afternoon, in the middle of a meeting, he simply froze. Words wouldn't come out, ideas were lost in the air. He excused himself, went to the bathroom and stared at his own reflection for several minutes. It was him, but it wasn't anymore. He had aged weeks in just a few days. His beard was unkempt, his eyes were deep-set, his posture was tense. He went home determined to change his surroundings. He needed to breathe fresh air, to escape the walls where love had died. He looked for a small apartment and rented it without thinking twice. When he arrived to tell Elisa, she was already expecting him. "Are you really going?" she asked without looking up. He didn't answer. He just said that the contract had been signed and that he would move in by the end of the week. He would take some furniture and leave the rest with her. Elisa nodded silently. But when he left the room, she ran to the door, grabbed his arm and whispered, trembling, "Do you still love me?" Daniel stopped, took a deep breath, without turning around. And he answered, "If I still loved you, I would have stayed. What's left is just a memory." And then he left. The new apartment was simple but quiet. It overlooked a park, and on Saturday mornings Daniel would watch the hallways, the couples walking their dogs, the children playing. They seemed as distant from him as the memories of his old life. He began to frequent a small cafe near the building, where a waitress with kind eyes always served him the same order, black coffee, no sugar, and a slice of apple cake. They didn't talk much, but her presence was comforting. Little by little, he began to develop a routine, trying to piece together the pieces of his life with everyday gestures. He read more, wrote in an old notebook, ran on cloudy mornings. And although he still felt a deep ache in his chest, there was also a new kind of relief, the relief of no longer living in the shadow of lies. Meanwhile, Elisa remained in the house. Alone, surrounded by the echoes of her own decision. She tried to schedule sessions with a therapist, but always gave up at the last minute. She walked around the house like a visitor who never had the courage to leave. Her parents walked away after dinner, too shocked to offer comfort. And she understood. She saw in every gesture of the world around her the reflection of what she had done. One day, she decided to go to Lara's university to try to see her. She waited outside, and when she saw her, she ran up to her with a nervous smile. "Daughter, I just wanted to see you, to know if you're okay." Lara stopped, took a deep breath and said, without raising her voice, "I'm fine. But don't call me daughter. Not today." Elisa felt the world spin. She tried to argue, said she was sorry, that she had cut ties with the other man, that she saw no point in anything if she couldn't rebuild the bridge with her daughter. But Lara just replied, "You want me back so you can feel less guilty. Not because you understand what you did to me. That's selfishness, not love." And she left. Elisa stood there, with tears in her eyes, hugging her coat as if she could hide from the world. But fate, always ready to overturn what remains of stability, still had one more move in store. One afternoon, Daniel received a message from an unknown number. A photo. It was Elisa. Sitting at a table in a restaurant, her face visibly haggard, next to a figure he immediately recognized, not the man she had been involved with, but another. A young man. With a familiar appearance. The caption read, "She's done this before." With his father. Confused, Daniel replied, asking who it was. The reply came minutes later, with another photo. The same Elisa, younger, smiling next to a gray-haired man, at some random event. And the text that followed said, "This man was married to my mother. And she destroyed him." History repeated itself. "I just thought you should know. She told me thinking she was opening up. But she was just revealing herself." Daniel felt his entire body freeze. That changed everything. It wasn't just a slip-up, a recent betrayal. It was a pattern. A behavior that Elisa had been repeating for years. She used the admiration she caused, her charm, her affection, to infiltrate relationships and break down structures. It was something deeper. Older. And worse. The boy in the recent photo was the son of the man she had been involved with in the past. She had met the son of her lover from years ago again. And gotten involved with him. As if closing a dark cycle that she herself had started. Daniel, overcome by a mixture of repulsion and disbelief, called Lara. He told her everything. His daughter was silent for several seconds, until she said, she knew what she was doing. From the beginning. "Dad, she didn't get lost. She was already lost." Daniel hung up and, for the first time in days, cried. A contained, deep cry that was no longer about the end of the marriage. It was about the destruction of an image. It was about realizing that you loved someone who maybe never really existed. That night, he decided to confront her. He drove to the old house, parked, and went in without knocking. He found Elisa in the living room, sitting with a book on her lap, her eyes red. When she saw him, she tried to smile. "Are you back?" she asked. Daniel approached slowly, placed his cell phone on the table with the images open, and said, "Do you want to tell me what these are?" Elisa looked at them, recognized the photos, and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, tears were already streaming. "I knew this would come back," she said. And then she started talking. She told him about the past affair with the boy's father. She said she was young, reckless, and that man had filled a void. She said she had been exposed, humiliated, abandoned. And that she never spoke about it to anyone again. Years later, she met her son again by chance at a literary event. She said she had tried to avoid it, but that the feeling of control, of dominance, attracted her. It was as if she had the chance to rewrite history. But she didn't. She repeated it. And she destroyed another family, as she had done before. "I am my own punishment," she said, her voice trembling. Daniel looked at her for a long time. And he replied, "You didn't just destroy families. You destroyed yourself. And you dragged everyone with you." When he left the house, he felt something different. It wasn't anger. It was freedom. The certainty that, even though he had been deceived, betrayed and manipulated, he would no longer carry any burden that wasn't his own. He returned to the apartment and spent hours writing. Not about her, but about him. About rebuilding. About starting over. And the next day, he met Lara at the cafe where they always went when she was little. She was already waiting for him. When he arrived, she smiled. And that smile was like a sun piercing a very long dawn. It was the beginning of something new. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel believed that it would be possible. Not to erase, but to move on. Not to forget, but to survive. Because even love, when betrayed, has the right to be reborn. Even if, to do so, it first has to see everything burn. The breeze that passed through the apartment window no longer brought the biting cold of the last few weeks. There was an air of change and suspense, as if time had finally begun to heal the environment after months of chaos. Daniel spent his mornings writing, not just as a way of processing what he had experienced, but as someone who was rediscovering a part of himself that he had let fall asleep. His words were not about revenge, nor hurt, but about reconstruction, identity, and choices. I was being invited to speak at support groups, small circles of men and women who had been through traumatic breakups and were looking for some relief in listening to each other. Although he was hesitant at first, he found an unexpected purpose there. He discovered that his story, however heartbreaking it was, had an echo in many others. And more than that, the way he reacted, the composure with which he maintained lucidity in the face of the abyss, was inspiring. But even with time, even with new faces and open possibilities, there was a space inside him reserved for silence that no one saw, the space where he kept everything he no longer wanted to repeat. Lara began to visit him frequently, often showing up unexpectedly with some food she had learned to prepare. Their conversations were filled with an almost sacred honesty. They talked about everything, without rushing, without filters. And for the first time, she got to know her father as a man, not just as a father figure. She discovered his fragility, his capacity to love and suffer with an intensity she had never imagined. Daniel, on the other hand, saw in his daughter a strong, mature woman, shaped by early pain, but still full of faith and affection. And it was there, among open books, shared music and reorganized memories, that the two rebuilt a home that did not depend on walls. Still, there were things that were left unsaid. Lara rarely mentioned her mother, and when she did, it was in neutral tones, as if talking about a distant acquaintance. Daniel respected that. He knew that the wound was still too fresh to be touched without caution. Elisa remained in the old house, now increasingly empty. The furniture hadn't changed, but the space felt smaller, suffocating. Memories accumulated in the edges of the curtains, in the smell of books, in the absence of voices. She walked through the rooms like a foreigner trying to decipher a language she had forgotten. She sent Daniel messages a few times, long messages, written during lonely nights, but he never responded. He read them all, with a mixture of pity and resistance, but he decided that silence was the only fair response. Not because he held a grudge, but because he understood that reopening any door would be an invitation to collapse. The choice to leave her in the past was more an act of self-protection than punishment. One night, Elisa went to her parents' house, after weeks of no contact. Her mother welcomed her with tired eyes, her father simply waved. Dinner was silent, until, halfway through the main course, her mother finally said that she could no longer defend her. That she no longer knew who she was. Elisa tried to argue, but there was no more room for justifications. She listened, silently, as she heard that her presence had caused shame, that her actions had hurt more than she could have calculated. And then she understood, in that bitter moment, that the damage was not only in the ruined marriage, but in the deepest roots of her history, in the relationships that she had contaminated with her own fragility disguised as freedom. She left there feeling smaller than she had ever felt, and for the first time she wanted to disappear. Not out of cowardice, but because she no longer knew who she could be from now on. A few days later, Daniel received an envelope left at the entrance of his building. Inside was a handwritten letter from Elisa. It didn't apologize. Nor did it beg for a reply. It was a story. A raw and painful dive into his childhood, into the absent figure of his father, into his first disastrous relationships, into the voids he learned to fill with seduction and escapes. Elisa spoke about herself with disturbing clarity, as if she were finally able to look in the mirror without looking away. In the end, she simply said that she had made a decision. She would sell the house. She would leave. Far away. Where she could no longer cause harm to the person she still loved. Daniel folded the paper carefully and put it away in the back of a drawer. Not because he intended to respond, but because there was something rare in that confession, truth. For the first time, Elisa was speaking without a shield. And he wanted to preserve that, even if it was no longer enough. As the days progressed, something unexpected began to unfold. A new presence appeared in Daniel's life. Someone who started out as a friend in one of the support groups I attended. Sophia. Widow, mother of a teenager, shy smile, firm gaze. They talked during breaks between meetings, exchanged books, discussed ideas. There was never any rush. No attempt to forcefully fill gaps. Just company. But little by little, it became constant. A coffee here, a walk there, until one afternoon in late autumn, Daniel realized he was waiting for her before he even knew she would come. Sophia wasn't intense like Elisa. She was calm, attentive, full of pauses. And it was in this gentle rhythm that Daniel allowed himself, for the first time, to think about a future that did not carry the debris of the past. Lara met Sophia on a sunny afternoon in the park. The connection was instantaneous, but more than that, there was a kind of recognition. As if they both knew, silently, that they were there to take care of the same man. The relationship between the three grew organically, without forcing intimacy, but cultivating trust. Elisa, when she found out from third parties that Daniel had started seeing someone, did not react with anger. She felt the impact, it is true, but she understood. Time had already done what it was supposed to do. And now, alone, in a distant city where she had silently moved, she sought to start over. She found a simple job, went back to school, and in her personal notes she wrote about everything she had experienced, as if trying to map an internal labyrinth. She knew she would never be the woman she had been before. But perhaps, with luck and effort, she could become someone less harmful. Daniel, in turn, decided to officially sell his share of the old house. He wanted to settle pending issues, remove symbolism. In the process of finalizing, he found some old photos hidden among books. He didn't throw them away. He put them all in a box and gave them to Lara. He told her that she should decide what to keep. Her daughter accepted, without opening the box at that moment. She simply said, "I understand that memories are not a place to live. They are only to be visited when we are strong." Daniel smiled. There was pride and pain in her eyes, and he knew that the scars, although discreet, would always be there. But now, they were no longer open wounds. They were part of history. And that was enough. That night, sitting next to Sophia in a cafe overlooking the illuminated street, Daniel held her hand more firmly for the first time. She looked him in the eyes and asked if he was ready. He hesitated, then nodded. He said he didn't know if he could be the same man he had been before. And she replied, "Maybe you don't have to be. Maybe now you can just be whoever you want to be. And that's enough." He smiled. A slight smile. Because he understood that, for the first time in a long time, life was no longer a repetition of losses and was starting to be a choice. And the next choice was getting closer and closer. But before that, there was still something to be said. Something he needed to understand about himself before turning the last page. Something that time, with its patient irony, still had in store for him. Autumn gave way to winter without ceremony. The mornings were shorter, the sun was shyer, and people, hurrying through their routines, walked around wrapped in heavy coats, as if they wanted to hide from the world. Daniel observed this often, from the fogged-up window of the cafe where he used to write. Sophia sat on the other side of the table, usually in silence, respecting that moment that he seemed to need so much. Between them, there was no urgency, no promises. It was a subtle construction, made of everyday gestures and listening without judgment. She knew that he carried something that could never be completely left behind, and he, in turn, saw in her a woman who had also faced losses that left no visible marks, but were present in the way she handled the words, carefully, as if each sentence could hurt or heal depending on the intonation. One afternoon, Sophia asked him how he saw himself now, after everything. Daniel took a while to answer, not for lack of words, but because he was still trying to recognize himself in his own skin. He ended up saying only that he felt like a man who had crossed a burning bridge without knowing whether the other side was solid ground or another abyss. She smiled, said nothing, but squeezed his hand as if to say, "I'm here, even if it's an abyss." Lara began to share more of her daily life with her father. She told him about her exchange plans, about the subjects she liked the most, about her classmates and even about a passion that seemed to develop slowly, with the care of someone who had already seen what love can do when it is not respected. Daniel listened attentively and, at times, found himself moved by his daughter's maturity, by her courage to move on even after everything. One night, while they were washing the dishes after dinner, Lara asked if he still thought about his mother. The question came softly but accurately. Daniel, instinctively, looked away, as if searching for the answer at the bottom of the sink. Then he said that he did think about it, but that now it was like remembering a dream that was once good, but ended in a nightmare. Lara leaned against the counter, crossed her arms and asked if he believed that one day it would be possible to forgive. Daniel dried his hands with the cloth, turned to her and answered in a serious but calm tone that forgiveness is a process and not a decision. And perhaps the hardest part was not forgiving Elisa, but himself, for not having realized it before, for having insisted too much, for having loved as if love were enough. Lara approached him and hugged him from behind. They didn't say anything else that night, but that silent moment had more weight than many conversations. The following week, Elisa sent a letter to her daughter. It was short, without any major explanations or attempts at reconciliation. He just said that he was fine, that he had started giving private literature lessons and that he was writing a book. I didn't ask for anything. He just said that if Lara ever wanted to talk, he knew where to find her. Lara read the letter and didn't tell anyone, but decided, days later, to send a reply. Not to open doors, but to say that I was fine, that I was moving forward. It was a response that, although dry, carried compassion. And Elisa, upon receiving it, cried alone in the little room where she now lived, feeling that perhaps this was the first sincere gesture between the two in a long time. In Daniel's new house, the atmosphere began to change. He and Sophia began to share little rituals. On Sundays, they cooked together. During the week, they read the same book and exchanged impressions. One night, over a candle at dinner, Sophia spoke about the husband she had lost, how he had suddenly fallen ill and how she felt their love had been interrupted, not ended. She said she had no doubts about how much she loved him, but that now, with Daniel, it was different. No longer that youthful love full of dreams, but a realistic, present love, that knew the weight of silence and the value of words. Daniel, moved, said that he had learned to love with more humility, without idealizations. That Sophia made him feel like he could still be whole, even after he had been broken into pieces. But not everything was perfect. At a social event held by the bank, Daniel met up with old colleagues, some of whom knew about his separation. One of them, already drunk, made unpleasant comments, suggesting that perhaps he had been too naive, or that Elisa had always behaved like that and he was the last to notice. In another time, Daniel might have reacted with fury. But that night, he looked straight at the man and said, in a cutting tone, being betrayed does not define me. What defines me is how I reacted. And I chose dignity. What would you choose? The room was silent for a few seconds before the music began to fill the room again. Sophia, who had been watching from afar, smiled. She knew that this was a turning point. Daniel was finally no longer ashamed of the story. He accepted it as part of who he had become. A few days later, Lara invited her father to visit the campus of the university where she studied. She wanted to show him her projects, introduce him to friends, and show him that she was building something new. The visit was light and fun. They walked through the halls, took pictures, and had coffee in the cafeteria. In a more intimate moment, sitting on a bench under a tree, Lara said that sometimes she still felt angry, but that there was something stronger than that, the certainty that she could be different. That she would not repeat patterns. That she would not use love as an excuse to hurt others. Daniel listened to her with shining eyes. She was becoming the woman he had always dreamed she would be, strong, sensitive, and honest. And that afternoon, when he saw her walk away smiling to meet her classmates again, he understood that, despite everything, something had gone very well. At the end of that week, Sophia invited Daniel on a short trip, just the two of them. They went to a small town full of history, cobblestone streets, and rustic inns. There, they walked aimlessly, laughed lightly, ate in hidden restaurants, and shared silences that required no explanation. On one of these walks, Daniel stopped in front of an old church, leaned against the stone wall, and stayed there for long minutes, just breathing. Sophia came closer, rested her head on his shoulder, and asked, "What's going on in there?" He answered, without hesitation, "Peace." Finally. She hugged him, and there, amid the distant sound of the bells and the light wind, Daniel realized that he no longer carried Elisa with him. There were memories, of course, but there was no longer a prison. A few days after returning, he received an email with the draft of the book Elisa had been writing. The title was still tentative, but the dedication read, "For those I loved wrongly, but who taught me what love is." Daniel didn't reply. He read a few pages. The text was good, raw, honest. There was a woman trying to understand herself. And for a moment, he felt compassion. Not to the point of rekindling any bond, but enough to sincerely wish she would find herself. Time went on. Life began to beat at a new pace. Lara was accepted into the exchange program. Daniel and Sophia started planning to live together. Elisa moved to another city and started from scratch once again. The consequences of everything she had experienced were still there, but they had lost the weight of a burden. Now they were just scars. Proof that everyone had survived. But one night, when watching an old recording of Lara's childhood, Daniel cried. Not because of the pain of what she had been through, but because of what was possible to rebuild from the rubble. He cried like someone who finally understands that certain losses cannot be erased, but can blossom into something unexpected. And it was in this unexpected something that the true story was now beginning to be born. Time moved forward like a slow, steady tide, silently transforming the shores of what was left of each of them. Daniel, after so many hiatuses and rebirths, made the decision to resign from the bank. He personally delivered the letter to the director, who received it with surprise, but understood in his eyes that there was nothing there that would bind him to those glass walls and numbers. It was not an escape, nor an impulse. It was freedom. The following month, he dedicated himself entirely to the project he had shelved years before, a course on emotional reconstruction, which combined elements of literature, therapeutic writing, and real experiences. The first module was launched in partnership with the university where Lara studied. Watching his daughter give her opening lecture, with her eyes full of tears and her voice firm, was like watching the conclusion of something he himself did not know he was building. She spoke about forgiveness, but not as immediate redemption, but as a process that requires courage, presence and, above all, responsibility for one's own suffering. When the audience applauded, he cried. For her strength, for his overcoming, for the path that, despite everything, had brought them even closer together. Sophia, increasingly present, became an organic part of Daniel's new life. But not as a substitute or escape, but as a partner on the journey. On a cold winter afternoon, sitting in front of the fireplace, he took a small wooden box out of his pocket and said that he didn't want to get married or sign papers, but he wanted to share his life with her, without any formalities other than the commitment to care, listen and respect. Sophia smiled, excited, and said that this was the most honest proposal she had ever received. That same night, they wrote letters to each other, sealed them with wax and kept them in a drawer with the promise to only open them if they ever forgot the reasons why they decided to stay. It was the symbol of the kind of love that sustained them, silent, mature, steadfast. Lara went ahead with her exchange program, spending 6 months studying abroad, immersing herself in new cultures, different ideas, and different ways of seeing the world. During this time, she kept in constant contact with her father and, to Daniel's surprise, even with Sophia, with whom she exchanged emails and talked about literature. Upon returning, she decided that she wanted to work on social projects related to emotional education for young people. She wanted to break cycles before they started. She wanted to show that it is possible to make mistakes without having to repeat them. When she graduated, she was honored with a speech that moved the entire room. She said that she did not choose the pain she experienced, but that she chose what to do with it. And this choice, more than any diploma, was her true title. Elisa, in turn, spent the following years in a solitary process of deconstruction. She moved to another city, this time to a smaller town where almost no one knew her. There, he began teaching at a modest school, where the students cared little about his past history. She was just another teacher. In the first few months, she isolated herself, avoided connections, and didn't want to be seen. But life, with its insistence on creating gaps, was opening small cracks in that armor of shame. A student, after a class on romantic poetry, asked why adults spoil love so much. Elisa swallowed hard and said that maybe it was because they were afraid of truly loving. When she saw the boy write that down in his notebook seriously, something inside her broke definitively. That night he wrote for hours. Not about others, but about you. About your choices, your arrogance disguised as freedom, your inability to realize that freedom without ethics becomes selfishness. She published a book of short stories months later, with characters that seemed to come straight from her memories, but with endings that she herself never had the courage to experience. The book circulated in small circles, but received a scathing review from a renowned writer who said that, the author writes like someone who is bleeding, and bleeds like someone who still wants to live. Elisa didn't smile when she read that. He cried. Because I knew I was finally alive, even though I was covered in scars. One day, with time already taking its toll on her wounds, Elisa decided to write another letter. Not for Daniel, nor for Lara, but for Sophia. He didn't apologize. She just said that if there was still a reason for Daniel to have been able to move on, it was because he had with her what he never had with himself, someone who offered presence without promising salvation. Sophia read the letter silently, folded it carefully and put it in its original envelope. He never showed it to Daniel. He never said he received it. Because he understood that certain things should only exist for those who have the courage to say them. And she respected that courage. On the last Christmas of that decade, Lara invited the two to spend Christmas Eve with her and a group of friends. Sophia accepted immediately, and Daniel hesitated for a moment before saying yes. During the evening, amidst soft music, mulled wine and discreet laughter, Daniel watched his daughter talking about a new project, now in partnership with international NGOs. Her eyes shone with the same intensity as when she was a child and talked about wanting to be an astronaut. He didn't interrupt her. He just listened. And when she looked at him and smiled, he knew that nothing, absolutely nothing, had been in vain. Later, as the guests began to leave, Daniel and Sophia walked through the deserted streets. Christmas lights still twinkled on the balconies and the distant sound of laughter echoed between the buildings. Daniel stopped, took a deep breath and said he couldn't remember the last time he felt so much belonging. Sophia rested her head on his shoulder and replied that perhaps this was just life rewarding those who, even when broken, never stopped loving the world. And so, over time, putting down roots in previously destroyed lands, each of them found a place. Not where they forgot what they had lived, but where they could transform pain into a path, loss into possibility. Because betrayal, as devastating as it may be, does not have the power to define a life, unless you give it that power. And now, we want to know, what did you think of this story? Which part touched you the most? Comment below, we really want to know your opinion. And if you are not subscribed yet, take advantage of this moment and subscribe to the channel to continue following impactful stories like this one. Remember, here, we do not support any type of betrayal. Our commitment is to truth, learning and emotional justice. Until the next story. And may life, even amidst the pain, continue to be worth living.